the more something scares you, the more something's amazing on the other side. As long as you're not going to die, generally use fear as an indicator of something you need to run towards. And if you're truly fearful of it, dive into it and just crush it and starve that fear and get to the other side. Because if you're at the wall of fear, find the door and walk through.
The more something scares you, the more something amazing is waiting on the other side. I love that. Dive in, crush it, and starve the fear. Man, Ben Killoy is all over it. This is Man of Mastery, episode 028 with Ben Killoy of the Military Veteran Dad podcast. So over there, Ben is helping vets, dads, men, everybody showing up for themselves, for their family, for their children. And given Ben's veteran focus, he cites the terrible statistic of 22 vets a day just in the U.S. committing suicide on average. Now, Ben is hitting the problem one veteran at a time on his mission. And as some of you guys know, I participated in the Burpees for Vets that was last year and into early 2019 through the Courage Foundation. That initiative and their mission for helping those same vets, the vet suicide issue and vets with PTS in particular, that Burpees for Vet initiative is cranking back up again. So go check out Burpees for Vets and the Courage Foundation. Jump on in. You can help through that. You can help vets, and man, burpees, you'll help yourself in a big way. So Ben went from being afraid to even talk to strangers to the realization that we often have a story we play for ourselves, a story that was probably false even to begin with, but at a minimum is way outdated and needs to be rewritten. And now he's living from a philosophy that you're always one conversation away from something amazing. And the awesome thing about Ben is he's all about action, as we are here. He's all about just doing one little thing at a time to really even make a difference. So I talked to Ben. I was interviewed over on his podcast, and now it's a pleasure and an honor to have him here and to learn from him. So here are my two biggest takeaways from today with Ben. So one is in that philosophy of taking a single step. Ben talks about the cloud or the fog of the inertia of inaction, of sitting still, of doing nothing, of feeling like a failure. And sometimes all it takes is that first single step to break free and clear the cloud and move forward. And I completely agree with that. It's really about one little step at a time. He's just spot on. And the second is you couldn't have a better attitude than Ben. I mean, he got this one from Zig Ziglar. How are you, Ben? Better than good. Better than good. Yeah, Ben's pretty amazing. So this is Man of Mastery, episode 028, with Ben Killoy of the Military Veteran Dad podcast. Thank you guys for being here. I really, really appreciate the support. I appreciate you guys wanting to tune in, learn, and hopefully taking that one step, taking action. So let's listen to this one with Ben Killoy of MVD. All right, fantastic. Hey, today I have Ben Killoy from the Military Veteran Dad podcast. Ben, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Michael, for bringing me on again.
Yeah,
good talking, and I know we've become friends over the last few months here.
You bet. Yeah, it's great to talk to you again. I know I had the honor of coming on your show here recently, and we talked a little differently from your normal mission. In my case, I'm not a veteran myself, but my father was, so I come from a veteran household. You are a veteran, and tell us a little bit about the mission you're on with your podcast.
Before I go into that, I'd like to I've heard a lot of, because I wasn't sure where your episode would go, but a lot of people that were outside continued to like your episode, and I got feedback that your perspective on how they turn their life around as a veteran or how they show up has consequences, both positive and negative, and that you really gave them kind of a big flashlight into the future of maybe what could happen if you're not cognizant of how you show up in your kid's life. So I really appreciate that episode that you gave us. And go into my podcast. So my podcast, I was kind of a little bit lost. I knew I wanted to side hustle, but I knew I was just kind of moving around. I was trying a lot of different things, seeing what would stick to the wall. Nothing ever felt right. And I went to a military influencer conference with the idea of a Vet Dad Life Coach podcast. And I had already actually bought a ticket to Podcast Movement in Orlando the coming year, so almost a year into the future. I didn't have an idea for a podcast. I had lots of wishes, but maybe nothing that I was ready to run towards. And it was almost like my accountability partner, that ticket. And at that military influencer conference, I went in with that idea, and I remember talking to a spouse about being a dad and how much I loved it. And I almost brought her to tears because her husband came home but never really came home. And he was just kind of always just watching TV, never really engaged with the kids, just in neutral. And that emotion, I was very like turned up inside. And from that conference, on the plane ride home, I wrote my business plan out. I came up with the mission to bring every dad home. And from there, 3 months later, I launched Military Veteran Dad podcast with that same mission. And I do it by just bringing everyday dads into conversations and telling everyday life stories to cancel out that inner thought that veterans have, and a lot of people have, but in this case, I focus on the veterans, that you're alone, and that voice inside your head, if you don't cancel it out, it just gets louder and louder, and eventually it comes to one conclusion, that your family is better without you. And another thing that I really resonated with this mission is that 22 veterans kill themselves every day, and even if it's 5 or 2, and there's a lot of debate on the number, but even if whatever it is, doesn't matter. But I realize all 22 are different people. You can't save all 22, and you can't save 22 by just bringing awareness to it. And so I just wanted to save one, the dad. And so instead of going an inch deep, 22 times wide, I'm going to go a mile deep with one person, the dad, and try to focus on trying to bring them home and to do everything I can to bring resources and things to enable them to be better dads.
That's amazing. I mean, there's just so much to unpack there, but I love the mission you're on. And I really appreciate the feedback and the kind words on the episode we did. And a little different perspective from my, now as an adult, having grown up in a military veteran household, was useful to your audience. I really do think a different angle on things is often very insightful. Maybe, just a new light bulb goes on. And I think with what you're doing, that's one of the reasons I really want to make sure that I got you on for my audience as well. When you talk about coming home, that's not just a military veteran dad problem. A lot of us get so busy that we think we come home, but we've put the kids in front of the iPad or the television. People are busy or distracted for lots of other reasons in modern life, blue collar, white collar. A coach of mine said to me earlier today, I just happened to be looking at the note here on my page, she said, oftentimes we should examine the story we tell ourselves. And the example she used was, I may tell myself a story that I'm busy because I'm important. And in reality, I'm staying busy to try to make myself feel important. So,
and your brain will fulfill whatever prophecy you believe to be true.
That's right. That's right. And a lot of times I think many of us stay busy because we think it's important to making a living for our families. And maybe it's not as important as the way we could be spending our time coming home.
Mm-hmm. There was something there you hit on that our common friend Ryan Nickler, he talks about protect, provide, and preside. A lot of the dads that we grew up with, it was all about just that providing. And in a lot of ways, there's still a very general providing. Like if you check that box, you've done your job as a dad. And there's one episode that we did. He was a mortgage, mortgage. I can't think of the end of that word, but he got so caught up in work, his life essentially collapsed, and his wife asked for a divorce, and he was 32, and that almost ended up taking his own life. And he realized that there is so much more to being a dad, and you have to be there emotionally, be present. Like providing in 2019 is no longer enough. And what you talked about there with work, like if you're not a veteran, you're still most likely caught up in the idea that you just need to do that one more email, or you just need to get caught up in all that extra stuff and stay late. And what most people are doing is they're writing checks they have no idea from a bank account they don't even know exists until you're 50 and you have grandkids, and you're comparing the memories of your grandkids to when you had kids, and you're like, I just don't remember this. And you realize I was writing checks of time and memories that was I didn't even know was happening. And that was for me a lot because I was in the same pit of getting caught up in work and staying up late and hustling and staying up late to do college work if you're going back to school. And all that can be great, but you got to be conscious of what that checks of time that you're writing. And it's a credit card. If you keep spending it just like a regular credit card, it will go bankrupt. And there often, I think the reason why the divorce rate can be so high is we just prioritize success in other categories, and that credit card gets so high that you end up living with a stranger and you no longer know who each other are.
No doubt about it. Slow down on the 50 and being a grandparent though, because I'm only a couple years away from that, and my son's only 11. So hopefully no grandchildren coming soon. But I really, in addition to the military vet perspective that you've got and that you're exploring and the mission you're on, I really love that you're drilling deep on the dad side. So quick string of events that really is part of what brought you and me together. So you mentioned the 22 vets a day, or that statistic around daily veteran suicides. Last year, I was participating in the Courage Foundation's fundraiser, Burpees for Vets, which is they're on a mission for vets with PTSD, trying to combat the same issue from another angle. And through their founder, Mark Devine, I recently got hooked up with a gentleman, Patrick Sweeney, people may know as the author of Fear is Fuel. And Patrick is a guy that completely transformed his life after a potential death sentence. He fell ill with a very, very significant disease. Doctors weren't sure he was going to live, and he was able to battle through it. And when he came out of it and he had to really examine his life, what he found is fear had paralyzed him for 30-something years of his life. And he had to figure out how he was going to live the rest of his life now. And he looked at his daughter and he said, I'm going to go after the biggest fear I've got in the spirit of my daughter and being her father, being a dad worthy of her. His biggest fear was flying. He'd seen a fatal plane accident as a kid. And so he decided to go take flying lessons and become a pilot, like do the scariest thing he could possibly do, to the point where after a few, he says he was literally kind of partially pooping his pants to the point where after he got into it and faced down that fear, he loves it now. But my point being that this is all driven by his daughter. It's all driven by being a dad, and the way that being a dad can help us find courage to do things in life like no other.
And what you realize when you start showing up and be present, they are literally following in every step you take. There's a meme that I see passed around the winter that as you're walking through the snow, it's a good reflection to remember where you're stepping, because especially in the snow, your kids aren't going to step in a 3-foot drift. They're going to step where you've already stepped to make it easier. And there is so much of life wrapped in that wisdom of that meme, because how you live your life, what terms you accept your life on will be the same construct or the view of the world that your kids accept life on. And what I love about what Patrick was talking about there was that 3,000 years ago, our monkey brain, the fear and flight, it was designed to keep us safe from lions, tigers, and bears. But there aren't that anymore. So everything becomes part of that same mechanism. But now in 2019, it can be something as simple as talking to someone. And that was in my category, that I had a fear. When I turned 30, my biggest fear was I was and it was triggered. I'll pull back a little bit. Jay Leno had just ended the Tonight Show, and everybody came out to say how impactful Jay was in their life. And I was just like, I got nobody. Nobody's going to do anything close to that. And I was reflecting on my funeral, like, no one's going to show up and say any nice things because nobody even knows I'm here. And it was a lot of it in my head, but in a lot of ways it was still true. And that was my 30-year midlife crisis. And that fear of talking to people was really what it was holding me back. Because every person I would talk to was that high school girl, that story that I was going to be rejected from high school, and my brain was validating it. I mean, I'm here today talking to you because I started talking to strangers. And for me, it started talking with dads at the park. I found the most easiest place to fight that fear, which was at the park where dads had kids. We were almost always on equal playing field. And if you're a dad at the park by yourself, you're probably a pretty good dad, or at least making a good effort. So it's a pretty safe place. And from there, it just kind of morphed into, and the brain started getting validation and feedback that there's our people. Like my third dad was a guardsman just up in Madison, Wisconsin. I was like, okay, this is how it works, and it was proven. I'm out here in Rhode Island recording this episode, and I was at a place having dinner on Wednesday night, and the guy next to me, he kind of looks interesting, about my age, and old me would have been like, you know what, he's getting ready, he's almost done, just let him go. I'll just sit here by myself on my phone. And I had to tell myself, like, F that, I'm done. I'm gonna say hello. And I asked him where he's from. He's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is 45 minutes from where I live. And he was literally sitting right next to me, and I would have missed that opportunity. We talked for 30 minutes. And I have no idea what's coming from that moment. But that fear, continuing to stretch that fear, it just continues to validate that one belief I have with conversations is you're always one conversation away from someone amazing coming into your life, and you're going to miss 100% of those chances you don't take. And it's been my one big thing with being a dad too, or even being a veteran dad. The like opportunity is one of the one things you miss, and friendships you miss, but you have to talk to people to create opportunity, and you have to talk to people to create friendships. And that one simple exercise of talking to people can really transform your life. And it's why I have a podcast, and I'm a completely different version of myself than I was just 5 years ago. And I just turned 35 just recently. So like the amount of progress I've made in 5 years and the perspective I have is completely different. And a Killoyism, which is kind of just my weird way of putting things, is the more something scares you, the more something's amazing on the other side. As long as you're not going to die, generally use fear as an indicator of something you need to run towards. And if you're truly fearful of it, dive into it and just crush it and starve that fear and get to the other side. Because if you're at the wall of fear, find the door and walk through.
Yeah, absolutely. The destiny on the other side of that door. You're right about the reptilian brain. It wants to do what it's designed to do to protect us. And those real life or death fears are few and far between, luckily for most of us in the first world, modern world. But
yeah, Facebook doesn't bite.
Facebook doesn't bite, but I'm scared of it. And
Exactly.
that's just a great example of it's going to find something else to latch onto that's not a real life or death fear, but our bodies and our minds will react as if it's a life or death sort of event. I'll pile on your story with one of my own. So as you know, I was just up there at the Spartan Media Fest in Tahoe, and you know, you have your Spartan pros, which are, these guys are a different breed, but it's pretty cool in that they still are very accessible to fans, unlike a lot of professional sports. I mean, these are real people and they're brand ambassadors. But the other absolute rock stars of that Spartan racing world are the adaptive athletes, the para athletes. There's a lot of veterans who are disabled in some way, who get sponsored by Oscar Mike and other organizations to run Spartan races. And these are some of the most amazing inspiration to the rest of us that are out there. So I saw a guy on the mountain on Saturday who has spina bifida, and when he was born, his doctors thought he would never even walk. And he's out there running Spartan races with leg braces and arm braces. And I saw him on the mountain Saturday. And then on Sunday morning, I saw him in the village, and I walked past him and I said hi and I gave him a high five. Great job. And my wife goes, "Hey, why don't you go back and get a picture with the guy?" And I'm like, you know, the fear thing just popped right up. Like, I don't want to bother this guy. You know, he's like a rock star.
Probably gets it 100 times a day.
Gets it all the time. You know, I don't want to bug him. I'm just like a guy here with a little podcast doing my own Spartan race. And I go back and we do the picture. He's completely into it. We have a great chat. He actually became a guest here on the podcast. It got released today. He's an amazing inspiration on a mission of his own. And I told him that story, and he goes, "You know what? You're the first person who's ever asked me for a picture."
And you gave him a gift of feeling popular.
and
imagine what that did for him. Like, you were his first.
Yeah, and so every time we have that made up story in our head that is our product of fear or is fueling the fear, there's a whole other story on the other side of it, and it's probably completely different.
And your brain will validate until it hears something different. And you gave him a gift of just being like, you resonated in a way that probably very few people have been able to do with him. And now he feels differently and you connected. And that moment would never have happened. And like that moment, you never know what's going to come from it, but it did happen. And now it's almost like a seed. Then you wonder what it's going to do and how it's going to grow. And the one thing that I've learned so far with my podcast is that you really need to be a type of person that touches someone deeper past the audio waves and electrons. And when you touch someone deeper than that, even just even an inch deep, you can just make that one small thing that much different. I'm big on thank you cards, and you never know. I've had so many times where like someone will say like, dude, that card hit me on the right day. And you just don't know what that person's mind is saying when they get that card. You're doing it and it takes 10 seconds and you may feel it's silly and you do it over and over and you don't know. Actually, on the way out here, I was reading an article. There's a CEO. I can't think of the name of the company, but it wasn't like a big popular company most people heard. He's got 8,600 employees and he writes a birthday card for everyone. And he knows what the value of touching someone deeper than just the words. And that's where the magic of life happens, is when you create human connection, which actually reminds me of another Killoyism. I was at Podcast Movement and I was watching the summary video that they did for Podcast Movement about the whole conference. And it hit me that like the hope of humanity doesn't lie in the internet. The hope of humanity lies in human connection. And in when our human potential figures out how to reconnect with each other, which right now I would say we're disconnected. But when we reconnect, man, the amount of potential and tools we have to change the world today and the speed, when we reconnect as a society with people, I can only imagine where we're going to go. Because that really, and podcasting is beautiful because I pictured like even the United States is a good example. Like the United States windshield that's been cracked with a big stone. It's still together. The little film holds all the little pieces of glass, but there is fractures everywhere. And podcasting is kind of like those little introducing conversations in between those cracks to re-glue it. And by one podcaster being this little speck in the windshield, re-gluing it and creating a whole bunch of random little connections, the window will come back together, but you just need to be a person out there talking about things that you're passionate and touching people's lives with that story, because you never know who you're going to talk to and who's going to change your life.
Yeah, I love that. I kind of take that as it's all about communication and connection. And we've gotten very disconnected, but this is certainly one medium to reconnect. And you know, I know you have a blast with it. I do too. So it's
an addiction now. It's something I'm focusing on all the time now. It's a problem.
It's a problem,
but a good problem.
It's a good problem. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a passion. And you've been at it a bit longer than I have. So let's just back up for a minute. I think if I'm not wrong from our earlier conversation, so you're married with 3 kids and you're a veteran of which branch of service? Marines?
United States Marine Corps.
United States Marine Corps. And you've been out for how long?
I got out in 2007, so I think I'm like at 18 years, if I'm doing the math right.
Okay, so you've been out since...
No, it's 2000. No, we're at like...
about 12 years.
13 years. Yeah, 12 years. I way rounded up too high.
No worries. And how long have you been married?
We got married in 2010.
Okay.
So we're coming up on my anniversary here next week. 10.
Nice. Congratulations in advance on that. And just trying to put some time frames to it because I want to know a little bit more about your journey. And I know you had sort of a 6-year journey with a bottom in there somewhere where you found some inspiration or maybe some desperation that's led you to where you are. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So we'll go back of how I became in the Marine Corps, because that's really where I made a 90-degree turn in a completely new direction. So I wanted computers, and in high school I never felt accepted, never really had good friends. The quality of the friends was never there. I had tried sports, I had tried pretty much everything. Really found a home in kind of Future Farmers of America. That was kind of like my thing. I grew up on a farm, so it was all kind of there. And then that was my addiction, was Future Farmers of America. And I didn't want to go to college because I didn't almost feel like I could do it. And I wanted computers. The Air Force had computers. I kind of wanted the easy way because that's kind of always the way that I'd always gone. I never really was truly challenged into taking the harder road. And I was ready to go. The recruiter came out. We were probably maybe a week away from raising my right hand. And the Marine recruiter had a bouncy house at our church picnic. And I had crossed the Marines off because I didn't want to be a grunt, and I thought that's all they were, and I didn't want to shoot stuff up. And so my mom goes over to make sure I'm exploring all my options. I don't even go over first. I'm too fearful. Maybe I want to, but I don't want to. But she goes over, and then next thing I'm talking to him, and then next thing you know, I'm talking to him in the high school at Tuesday, and then 2 weeks later, I'm raising my right hand for the Marine Corps. And it was almost my dare to be great moment. Like I did it out of like one, I probably couldn't have the balls to tell him no. But then two, like there was something about it that like this is the greatest challenge I've had so far, and I need to just kind of do it and go through it. And it was super scary. And boot camp was super hard for me. I'm not a mentally tough guy. And the Marine Corps was generally a place that was still very hard 4 years for me. But I got out of the Marine Corps because I just had this feeling inside that I wasn't going to reach my full potential. I had found a few things that I was good at, and I loved being a Marine, but I didn't always like the Corps. And I knew I couldn't shoot and I couldn't run, and these were things that the Marine Corps requires to be good, be a good Marine at least. And so I got out, and then I got a job really quickly. Just kind of dove into what I thought was the plan. I followed the government training. I went and got a suit, got a job, and then I just got lost in the corporate world. And I was at the same time I was in a big hurry to catch up. Back then in 2007, if you weren't married and had kids by 24, you were behind. So I was just big hurry to catch up. So I started dating. I got married about a year after meeting my wife. Through that all, I was just never whole. Looking back, like I was just a skeleton on the inside of a person that was so scared that just was really going through a rut. And I've heard it beautifully said by Andy Frisella that the only difference between a rut and a grave is the depth. And that one's 8 feet and one's can just start with a few inches. But eventually you can get all the way down to 8 feet and be in a grave. And that's where I was just felt like I was in a rut. And then I left that first job after 5 years and went to a different job. And I only really did it again because I was like, what's out there? I've only had one job. I don't want to be a one-trick pony because that was my corporate experience with that one job. So I went to where I'm at now. And I really just started peeling back the onion again and trying to figure out what I did. And I had a lot more freedom to explore who I was and what I liked doing as a career path. And I eventually got promoted to supervisor. And then I was looking up a class to attend to just kind of train to be a better supervisor, and it was called making the transition from staff to supervisor. And my expectations were fairly low. I go to it, and there was a man with a golden voice, and he was talking about Zig Ziglar, who I had never heard about in my entire life, and he was talking about leadership, and I'm raising my hand all the time with all the answers, and I'm like, all this stuff was in there somehow. Like civilian world just suppressed all these talents. And that's when I was like, I love leadership. And it reminded me of a moment in the Marine Corps when I was platoon sergeant, like taking a Marine that other people had given up on, finding out what makes them tick, what makes them move, what makes them inspired to be something better, or seeing something in someone that you could help develop. Like I love that. And that's what leadership was for me. That really sparked the whole self-help where I am today. And I started diving into Zig Zig. And one of my first books was Better Than Good, which is why I answer Better Than Good when anybody asks how I'm doing. And I've never had someone say it first. And I know that day when it happens, it's going to be a very magical day because like a lot in the universe had to align for that to happen. I'll probably at some point go to like Zig Ziglar's legacy certification, and there I'm sure it's going to happen because it's at the center of the well. But that really transformed and just kept going. And the one thing that I didn't do was because I was still fearful of action. I was hooked on wisdom and knowledge, but then I knew too much. It's almost like you know how the world works, but you don't know how to do anything with it, and you overthink everything. And I'm a big overthinker. And then I had to transition. I was like, I got to start doing something with this. And then just once you start doing something with it, and then just kind of figuring things out, and just keep doing it until you figure it out. And I'm a big believer that you don't find your passion, you follow your curiosity, and your curiosity will lead you to your passion. And that's what I've kind of done. I've just kept following my curiosity through all of that pit. And combined with that, when my 30-year midlife crisis of talking to people, that combined with all the self-help, that put me in a place where I am today to be a more well-rounded individual, to show up and to be okay with whoever I am, being okay admitting that I'm a guy that people compliment me on my hugs. Like that's something I'm never would have been okay with admitting on a podcast, but now I completely own it because it's something that people constantly say. So who am I to hide from this gift that people keep giving me?
That's a good one. Well, I mean, all that sounds amazing. Was that an easy journey? I mean, my experience is that when people have that kind of transformation and success and make progress, the highlight story, the highlight reel, always looks great. And from that surface layer, it's a success. But success usually is a process, and oftentimes there are some hard lessons learned in there, maybe built on failures. Any lessons learned or failures along that way as you've discovered what you're really meant to do and what your passion is?
There's one that was before I had my podcast. I was just wanting to blog, and I had this idea of being a life coach. So I was just kind of putting in the reps, doing blogging, exercising, getting good at writing, not maybe being completely coherent on a avatar or who I'm talking to, but I was just writing. And I was in a depressed state. I was in a couple masterminds with some other dads, and they challenged me to write a letter to myself of why I was worth it, because I really have always had low self-worth. And so I wrote a letter to myself in the context of a friend reminding me why I was worth it. And so this is me writing these own words. And I'm writing along, and all of a sudden I write the most profound thing I've ever said to myself. And it's weird because it never would have happened unless I wrote that letter in that way. And I told myself, like, you have this story that all these things, you being bullied, being pushed down, all of these things are somehow just holding you back. Like, you can't let go. But in reality, early in life, people pushed you down so that later in life you could pull people up. And that hit me like a bag of bricks. I'm like, what just happened? Because then I just gave it purpose. Like, that's why I like seeing someone's face when, or I don't like it, but I can recognize it when they need a friend. Like, that's something that I am super impactful now with, when I aware, just showing up and being a friend when someone needs it, because that's what I needed back then. And I was that guy. I know what that feels like. So I'm constantly trying to just gift that to other people. And I tell people on my podcast, my first product is free, and I'm essentially the friend I wish I had 5 years ago. But it was a good lesson that all hard roads lead to somewhere, and that some of the best flowers grow from the biggest piles of manure. And you just have to sometimes go through that. And there's something I often reflect, that some of the best people at the top are the ones who started way at the bottom. Oprah Winfrey if you've ever seen any of her videos of where she started, you wouldn't even believe it. And those people that start there and have that adversity, they go light years into the future, farther than anybody else. That sometimes you need to go those hard paths so that you can start running later. And you won't know where you're headed or why you're headed there until you get to the other side of what you're walking through. And it's hard. It's not easy, because there's sometimes that life is super difficult. And there's something I repeat in the podcast a lot, that for 3,000 years, men and women survived in tribes. And we did life together. We hunted, we gathered, we trained, we leaned on each other. And in the last 100, with the Industrial Revolution, we just got away from that. We thought we could do it alone, and it's progressively getting worse. It's why the male suicide rate is climbing, because we were never meant to do it alone. But that's exactly how society says you need to be a man. You need to be that stereotypical suck it up kind of guy. But I often say, like, you're not meant to lift everything that life gives you. So life will be hard. And that's what I've learned is it was extremely hard when I was alone. I had nobody to talk to about what I was thinking inside my head. And now I'm surrounded by more friends than I can count, that if I have multiple people when I have something go wrong that are, boom, reaching out to see if I need a friend or anything, because that's how you get through when it's hard. Like, that's a fallacy that often isn't talked about enough, that life is hard. And often people will always say, like, it's life's a bitch and then you die. And there's a part of that most people don't talk about. It's that way for everybody, but some people make it and some people don't. And the major difference is the people make it aren't alone. They have those people, to whether church or community, it doesn't matter. That's one thing that I wasn't doing. And this is why my 30-year midlife crisis was so hard, because it was alone. And I was struggling to look at my daughter in the face and be like, what kind of dad or what kind of person am I raising? That having that community has been the one thing that has opened up so many more doors, and how it's talking to strangers and creating more friends and creating more connections. And but one 30-minute conversation can turn it around. But if you don't have someone to have that 30-minute conversation with, you're going to stay in the bad day. And that's just going to be the cycle you repeat. And eventually your mind only sees that one way of life, and you don't see another way out, except sometimes in killing yourself, because that's the only conclusion you can come to.
Yeah, I do think we've somehow created a very, very lonely society, at least in this part of the world. And I know,
And we've never been more connected in the history of humanity.
connected in a way, but very, very
Yeah,
superficially,
exactly.
right?
I mean, friendships are the new social media.
Let me post a picture of the beef shank that I have in the slow cooker right now.
Yeah.
That's not a very deep connection. And I live in San Diego. It's a big military town, big veteran community here. And you're right. I mean, historically, we're not that many generations back from the cavemen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or those 3,000 years ago that you're talking about, bears and wolves and real life or death kind of stuff, where we hunted as a pack. We're pack animals. We're tribal animals.
And the lone wolf always dies.
Yeah, we are not meant to be lone wolves, and I think that's for you, for veterans in particular, when you come out into the civilian world, I think some of the big things missing are team and mission. And we got to find it in other ways, or as you mentioned, some other ways to plug back into new communities, or maybe communities of veterans. One of the things that you're bringing together with your community of military veteran dads. So if we also extend that to dad, being dads and with our kids, and I think part of what you mentioned there inherently is around fear, and we're talking a lot here about fear,
Yep.
right? I actually just heard recently that the amygdala, that part of the brain center that is the fight or flight, is fully developed in infants from birth, which makes sense, right? There's a biological imperative to survive, so that we as parents actually have the ability, and I don't mean that in a good way, in today's world, we have the ability to pass fears along to our children.
Yeah, I mean, the helicopter parent is the one that keeps them in that fear mode of not moving past it. That there is something that on that fear, and I have to be cognizant of it, and it's gonna hurt me.
Right. Yeah. And so not only are we addressing fears ourselves for ourselves to be better versions of ourselves, we have, for these misplaced fears, we have an imperative to fix them so that we don't pass them along and crush our children with the same issues.
And military dads, this is why I'm so strong about this. We have so much wisdom and experience to gift our kids of how not to live in fear, that we are doing such a disservice if we don't teach them how to face it every day, do adventurous things, go on adventures, go see amazing places in the world, because that's literally how you start invalidating that, start doing things little by little that start me even bringing your son on the Spartan races. Like, that's one thing. At my age, I would have been fearful of what if people judge me and think I look like an idiot out there. You've already walked past it, and if I can do that, then I can do what's behind the Spartan race that I could do bigger, because I'm not even thinking about that anymore. And I did a 5K recently, and I had a fear of running because it was almost like PTSD for me from the military, because I was never good at it. And I had a fear of, like, I'm going to be out there running, and what are people going to think? And oftentimes what you realize after you run it, you're like, people often just think like, wow, I wish that was me. I wish I could do that. They don't think like, oh, that guy looks like he's an idiot when he's running. They're like, oh, that guy's running and I'm not. That's more what they're thinking versus like actually judging you.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife is finally gearing up to do her first Spartan race, and I think that's been one of her fears is, hey, I'm not ready yet, or what if I'm not ready, or what if I can't do the obstacles, or I'm going to look silly out there. And I go, you know what, you got people standing around at the bottom, or sitting at home on the couch, and then you got people that are out there trying to do it, trying their best. And I don't care if you're the pro athlete running 5-minute miles, or you just physically barely got yourself off that couch and can barely, put the left foot in front of the right foot. You're making an effort. And those
Or
first
even if you get
steps,
up in 5 a.m. to go for a walk and you're like, man, I could do more, but put yourself at yourself in the back because you're still running laps around the person that's still in bed.
Yeah, exactly. You're just you're taking action. You're doing something rather than nothing. And that's the most important thing.
And there's one thing that I've really realized is, and this is where I think tied to fear, when you're standing still, a fog sets in, and it's almost like it's like fear, a fog or a fog of fear, that you just can't feel what's around. You can't feel anything, and you're just standing still, and you're like, oh my God, this world is so scary. I can't see anything. But there's a secret to that. All you got to do is take a step, and that step, that single step, can start to lift it. It doesn't even. It can take a similar thing. A good example is the weekend. I can have a to-do list, and I'm just like, oh God, this list is so overwhelming. Where do I even begin? And you get three things knocked out, and you feel like $1,000,000. The fear's not there. You can feel like you conquered the world. All you had to do was start knocking out a few things, and that feeling is no longer there. And before, I was in a fog of like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and watch Netflix. It's too overwhelming to try to tackle this list. But then when you start knocking it out, you're like, oh, I can do what else can I do? And it's not so hard once you start taking a few steps. But that's all you need to do is take a few steps, and that fog slowly starts to lift, and you realize, oh, there's an entirely new world on the other side of this fear that I never would have known, which is why I often say the more something scares you, the more something's amazing on the other side, that you'll just reach your deathbed and never know what was on the other side of that fear. And there's a good quote by Dale Carnegie from his book Outwitting the Devil, that the worst thing in life is when you die and the devil reflects who you could have been. And the devil wins when you get to see that person. You realize you didn't become that person.
Well, hey, congrats on the 5K. That great way to pick an event and lean into some fear. What about what kind of things do you like to do on a daily basis, Ben? And with what you've been going through yourself, developing, facing fears, getting really outside your comfort zone, how's that made a difference in how you show up on a daily basis for your family, for your wife, for your kids?
So it starts with recognizing you need to make little deposits in yourself and figure out in small ways how to move your life forward in a little bit of ways. So 2 years ago, I was tired of my pants not fitting. And it's a common theme. I've always been a heavyweight guy. And I was like, I'm just so sick and tired of my pants stop fitting. It was this cycle. And so I joined, and a Facebook ad came across for a Driven Dad program. It was an 8-week program. Gave you a nutritionist, gave you a gym guy, and somehow it was a Saturday night. I dove into it. And that Monday I had a gym membership, and I hadn't had a gym membership in 10 years. And I started with 5 a.m. gym workouts. And I learned some great things in that very first week. And one of the first ones was, it was like on day 2. I was like, and it was another Killoyism. It's like, I really should try to find one thing to do every day that will change every tomorrow. And no matter how much my life sucks right now, no matter how much crap will come into my life at work, I've already done something by 5:45 that will literally make every tomorrow better, no matter what happens the rest of the day. And that was super powerful because that gave me momentum towards trying to beat maybe whatever came through my life that day. And you can reset your day that way intentionally, either through like a miracle morning routine, through meditation, through journaling, but just do something where you feel some momentum that this is. And then I also coined them as daily deposits. And then it worked even further, like make daily deposits in the bank of tomorrow. Like you need to figure out a way to build small little deposits that make a better you in a small increments. And those dividends will create a version of you that you've never even dreamed of. And for me, that's really where I focus on. I wake up in the morning and it's a little bit chaotic because my wife works as a teacher. So we're right when I get home, showering, get the kids outdoor by 6:30, go to work and come home. And then a lot of my time, I just really focus on being a dad right now. So my kids are 7, 5, and 3. And this season of my life is the one everybody wants back. So my podcast goes slower. My lots of things that I want to do, I don't do. I put them into a different season of my life when my kids don't want to hang out with me. Like I want to be a paid public speaker, and I would love that right now, but I'm not willing to trade the memories for that. So it's just a different season of my life where that will come true. And so a lot of times I'm just being dad. I'm just playing with my son, playing with my little daughter, or doing something with my oldest. And or just helping her in the house, food, anything that just is engaged in the family. Like that's where I feel the most home. And like my perfect world is that somehow in the next 3 years I become a stay-at-home dad. Like I would just love to be intentionally there for the next 5 years and almost just take a break and to be there and then step back into more of the things I want to do when we've entered a different season of our life. And that really what drives me today is just showing up and being dad. And the weekend, I love just showing up and being dad. My wife went to China in June, and I was those 10 days that I was a stay-at-home dad. I took off vacation those 10 days. I know I was on a hangover of being a dad for almost 2 months because I wanted that 10-day period back. It was so rewarding. It was so intentional, and I just wanted more of them. And I know when I'm 50 looking back, like that will be a magic 10 days that I reflect on a lot of what I hope that I created more of in the future.
That's awesome. Sorry, my son just stuck his head in.
Life happens on podcasts.
Life happens. No, that's awesome. And you can't undervalue that. Really what that comes down to is time and memories that you're creating with your kids. It's invaluable. Mm-hmm.
And they're never coming back. And you make a choice whether you realize it or not. And I'm lucky enough to be aware of it, so I'm intentionally changing my behaviors. But I realize that the best chance that I have on this earth to make it a better place is to make better adults. And my kids are the best way to do that. And showing up in their life now creates better adults later. And all you need to do, I talk about on the podcast, kids spell love Time, and all they want is your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tie that together with your daily deposits on, these Spartan races that I started doing, and now I have my son doing the kid version, and we my son and I think we're getting mom to try one coming up here early next year. One way to look at it might be, well, gosh, like how much time is this taking? I'm doing 20 something races and events this year. Look, I started 5 years ago. It was just past my 5-year anniversary of my first race. No, I'm sorry, 4 years, 2015. That some buddies talked me into it on the spur of a moment with 2 weeks notice. And man, I thought I was in decent shape, and I barely survived that first one. It was the shortest one. And then just a couple weeks ago, I did a 30-mile Spartan up and down the mountain in Tahoe in snow and winter conditions. And it took me 12 hours, and it was tough. But, I look back on it and I go like, yeah, I would do another one of those, no problem. And I look back at the progress I've made, and it kind of goes back to that same thing about looking at any kind of a journey as a process, not just a singular event. If somebody goes, oh man, you're doing 30-mile Spartans, I could never do that. Well, no, like I'm fully on board with Joe DeSena's mission and trying to help be one of the people that rips the other 100 million people off the couch to try one of these things, because it happens one step at a time. And I said, like, I'm fearful of Facebook. I'm not comfortable with it. And I went and put a video on there. First time I've ever done a video on Facebook this past Friday. I recorded a 1-minute clip of myself during my son's soccer practice on a Friday evening. And I go, hey, this is kind of me in my element. It's Friday evening. Maybe some people are at happy hour. I'm alone on a dirt field doing laps because I'm going to make the best use of time that I can because life is busy. So I'll get 45 minutes of a workout in while my son's doing drills, and then I'll go watch 30 minutes of his scrimmage. And I just got, a 45-minute workout in, and that's my daily deposit, my next step towards my next training or my next thing, instead of making an excuse of, well, I worked all day and I took my son to soccer and then it was nighttime. So, I found that little sliver and got outside my comfort zone to post something about that, just not from the perspective of, hey, look what I'm doing and you're not, but more of, hey, we can all find time to do something like this, and it takes some sacrifices, but you got to make those small steps.
And those sacrifice. I mean, think of the memories that you now make together with your son that probably would have been, you had to put probably, if you didn't have Spartan to have the level of connection with your son, you would have had to put a lot of energy into something else. And you would have divided your time. You would have said, I'm going to be a Spartan, and then I would have had to figure out something else to do with my son. And now he's following in your footsteps. And even as I'm running, like my kids are very young, but my oldest is wanting to run with me. And even my youngest, where I've been like, I'll come home from a run in the morning, and it was in the summer, and they would just be super upset that I didn't wake them up. And then they would be like, Daddy, you said you would wake me up. And I'm just like, I'm not waking you up. I don't know what you want me to tell you. But then one day I went, it was like in the afternoon, I wanted to go for a run. And I was like, I was just going to take the oldest two because they wanted to run. And my son got school shoes, and he just kind of called them his super racing shoes. So he thinks he can go super fast running. But it's all because I started running. And so I took all three kids with me, and it was an absolute freaking disaster. My son started getting cramps. My youngest wanted to walk, and my oldest was frustrated because she just wanted to run, and the other two were holding us back. I ended up running with my youngest on my shoulders for a little bit, and it was just a hot mess. But it's a memory that I make now, and it was something we did together. And like, life is going to be messy. Like I often say, Miss Frizzle on the Magic School Bus has the best advice in life. Just life is about getting messy and making mistakes, and it's not going to be pretty. And that wasn't pretty, but it was a memory, and we did it together. But it was all started because I started running, and now they're following it. And in 2019, having any type of curiosity for running for a young kid is going to do miles of dividends in the future compared to where we are today versus obesity and health.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I was just looking to see if I could find and quote my wife on something, and I can't find it specifically. But to your point about the time and the memories that Spartan has allowed us to create together as a family, and for me as a father, I mean, yeah, there are pictures, there are memories, and my son and I have both been actively involved as runners, and my wife as the team support vehicle and the cheerleader. She's actively involved as well. Sometimes she runs as much as I do, taking pictures of our son. And we do travel a lot to these things. So it gives us these opportunities to be together as a family and go cool places and have time to talk and unplug from.
And what better way to improve your health?
And health as a component of it as well. And so what I was trying to find for you is she commented on something from Joe DeSena, the Spartan founder, on Instagram a week or so ago, where she tells him, quite honestly, what a profound positive impact his sport has had for us as a family and our closeness as a family. It was pretty cool.
And that's the ripple effect when I was talking about when you go deeper than audio waves. Like, it's just not about the running. Like, there is thousands of ripples at every event of a family that came back together, a family that maybe was reunited, a family that found a way to communicate to each other or found something in common they could do together. You have no idea what you coming together as a trifecta or any family or anybody that has their life changed by a Spartan, what they are capable of going out into the world and changing. And when you think of the ripple effect of how many ripples it takes, and it doesn't take that many, and one person that you change could be the one guy that goes out and saves a life someday. And it's why I love podcasting, and it's why I love talking to people now, because you just never know who needs a friend, and you never know what you could prevent by saying hello. And ultimately, when it goes to strangers, you never know what it took for someone to put their pants on that day. And the giving that gift is, even as Spartan, every one of those races is a gift in a way, and he'll never understand the impact. But when people think him like that, that's when it validates everything he's doing, and it just proves of how crazy the universe actually works. It works in an uncontrollable way that just requires you to be decent to others, to do things that others won't. And the universe somehow works itself out if you're one of those people making positive ripples.
Yeah, it sure does. And you never really know when those ripples are going to come home. You know, like the run you went out for with your kids. Yeah, I think you and I talked about on your podcast when I would go camping and hiking with my dad as a kid, or us as a family. You never quite know what memories are going to stick with kids and how that's going to...
And what they choose to pass on.
And what they choose to pass on, or what they choose to grab onto later in life. So you never know. Like, you could be sitting around talking to your kids 20, 30 years from now, and they go, "Hey, Dad, remember that time we had to run home with one on your shoulders, and we did this and we did that, and it was such great memories. And now, you know what? I think about that every time I run in the morning, Dad."
Yeah. And it was a hot freaking mess that my wife thought I was nuts, and I thought I was nuts at the same time too. But I started some fear. I leaned in. I knew no one was going to die because I was going for a run, and it you just have to sometimes get messy, and that's somewhere where the best stuff happens.
Absolutely. Well, with those ripples and with bringing people together through podcasting as one way of community building and communication, and particularly for your mission, military veteran dads, what's the best way for folks to tune in, find you, learn more about what you're doing, and become part of that community?
So the best part is all you got to remember is those three words, military veteran dad, because the podcast is pretty much everywhere you can find podcasts. You can listen to it on even Alexa if you ask her to play the military veteran dad. My email is ben@militaryveterandad.com. The website is the same name. Instagram handle is military veteran or @military veteran. And I also have an Instagram handle for my personal @Ben_Killoy. Instagram's an easy way to get a hold of me if you just want to send me a message, or if something resonated, you got a question. I am more than happy to talk to anybody. It's one of my favorite things to do on my commute. I was talking to you just last week on my commute, and I'm often willing to talk to anybody that has an ear. And but I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the same handles. But militaryveterandad.com is the website where you can catch up all of the website episodes. We have a Facebook group. If you are a military veteran dad, would love to have you in there. I'm blogging in there, just talking about what's going on in my life. And actually, for my birthday, I shared 20 things that have changed my life to make me who I am by the age of 35. And so every day leading up from September 1st to the 20th, I was sharing some story that made me who I was. And so all that's in there. There's a lot of good content of just wanting to get to know me already there when you first come in.
Nice. I'll put links to all that. And even for those who may not be military veterans or even dads at this point, you've got all the other avenues to reach out to you. And so I will encourage people to, if they're interested, lean into their own fears and get in touch with you, Ben.
Talk to a strange guy on the internet that you've never met. And you don't have to be a dad. I'm willing to talk to anybody, because every person is a person of value, and everybody is a somebody to somebody.
Well, I love what you're doing, and look forward to seeing more. Thank you so much for your time. I know you had to carve it out of your business trip. So thanks for staying up late and being on today. I really appreciate it, Ben. It's always great to chat.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity. And I when you're a podcaster, you don't often get a lot of chance to tell your story, so it's often nice going to other people's podcasts and getting to tell your own story, because you're not always the person of the attention. So I really appreciated the opportunity to help inspire other people in different channels, and even if you're not a dad, to hopefully maybe bring you home even if you're not a dad.
Yeah, I think we can all take away a few Killoyisms from it, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yep.
All right, that ran a little long with Ben Killoy of the Military Veteran Dad podcast, but Ben is awesome. They're on an incredible mission. The podcast is amazing. Just tune in, check out what he's got going on. You can find all the links at manofmastery.com/028. I also want to ask that you continue to help me out here. Go out to Apple Podcasts, rate and review the podcast. Not only does it help the show and help get it out into and in front of others, but the feedback is absolutely invaluable, and I really appreciate the continued support and all of that feedback. And then also check out @TheManOfMastery on Facebook if you haven't already, or on Instagram. So stuff there pretty regularly, and there's a group for guys starting up on Facebook as a closed group that will be a continuation and dive deeper on these same topics. So, all right, everybody, get out there and take that one step, break the fog of inaction and get going on something. Pick one thing, take a small step, enjoy the week, and we'll see you next time.